Good morning. Hopefully my voice is there and sounding all right. And hopefully the sound from Ableton is there. I believe that they are. There we are. Lovely. Managed to get my audio setup actually working entirely properly today, so hopefully things should sound nice. And hopefully the internet connection will be next to us. I hope everybody's having a good lockdown. I've been working on my lockdown beard. I've been watching more Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Been enjoying the wonderful sunshine, which does make these things a little bit easier. Get a bit of vitamin D the natural way. It's good. I did begin watching the Alex Garland's TV show Devs, which is grim but really good. Do recommend it, although it does have some, it can be traumatic at times. And I've written a little bit of music, which is nice. This has been a good opportunity to have a mess around with Ableton, and also to have a mess around with the newer version of Ableton, because I've been using Ableton Live 9 for years and years and years and sort of resisted upgrading, and I'm thinking maybe it's time that I update. They have made things a little bit nicer in the new version. Lots of little nips and tucks in Live 10, and what I've been teaching on is Live Intro 10. It's good. I quite enjoy it. So I might just ramble for another minute or two, see if anybody else is going to pop in. But good to see a good few of you back. So I think what I'm hello. So I've got a few things to go over today. I think most people are returning, so I'm not necessarily going to be going back over so much stuff. But if anybody, obviously, if you're in the chat and there's anything from previous weeks that you want a bit more clarification or anything like that on, just let me know. I'm totally happy to go over stuff. So today I think I'm definitely gonna look into some stuff about automation, how you can kind of record controls, and you can automate, well, at the basic level you can automate things like volumes of tracks throughout your arrangement, or pans. You can automate effects. You can automate just about anything in the whole program. You can draw in automation of controls of synths and effects, and the volume of tracks, and switch things on and off. You can do crazy amounts of stuff, and it's all pretty easy to do. I think people are here, and if anyone pops in late, they can always just run 5 minutes behind and scroll back to the start of the video. So I might just begin. So I've got a little tune that I knocked up yesterday, just to work on today. I decided to set myself some limitations, so it is all made with the pretty much all made with the little sample pack that I sent you last week. All the synthesizers are just using that those little tiny little samples put into simpler. Just I thought I would try and give myself limitations. Oh yes, and we are at a high resolution today. I thought I would give it a shot, see if the internet will stand up to it, see if my computer will. It is making a noise a little bit like a jet engine at the moment, but it's getting on a bit, but still going. And they're not cheap, these Mac computers, so I don't really want to buy another one. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I've got this tune here. It's got a few things in it, but I'm just gonna show you a little bit about how you can automate parameters. So I'll start off doing it in the session view. So I'm just going to work on this this synth track here. So I've got this little synth part, and I'm just going to turn down the output of Ableton a little bit so that hopefully you'll hear me okay over the top. Do let me know if you don't. So I've got this little synth loop, and it's quite fun. I quite like it. But I'd quite like to kind of twist some of these knobs and record in what I'm doing, so that there's just a little bit more movement to, a little bit more interest to what's going on with that synth part. So what I need to do, I'm just going to make sure that the track I want to work on in session view is record enabled, is record armed, as they call it. And we've got this little session record button up here. So if we click that, firstly that would let you record stuff in the current clip. So once this is on, if I go down here to the controls on this synth and I start twisting knobs, I'm just gonna move the filter frequency around, because I'm a big fan of sweeping the filter frequency around. It's good noise. And actually this is a loop, so it's actually quite a long loop. It's an 8 bar long loop. I'm just going to sweep this around with my mouse a little bit. And as I let go, you'll notice, well, firstly, hopefully you'll notice it's got a little red circle on it. So a little red circle on any parameter, that means there's automation on that. That means that you've recorded something and it's playing it back, and now you can see that it's now moving of its own accord, as if by a ghost. And I can do that with as many parameters as I want. If I want to automate this filter drive as well, I can do stuff with that. Or maybe this filter resonance. And you can do loads of stuff with that, depending on what parameters. It doesn't have to just be that. I've got a delay effect on this track, so if I do stuff with the settings on the delay, that'll all get recorded in and it'll all get played back. So I'm just gonna click off this little session record button, and that exists because if you just want to play with the parameters and not record them in, make sure that's off, and then it'll just move the parameter to that, and it just stays, and that's fine. But if you want to be recording your movements, make sure that your track is record enabled and that the session record button has been pressed. And so now I have a synth part that's just got a bit more going on. Now, say I've recorded some of those knob movements in, but I didn't do a great job of it. I want to smooth it out, or that rather than recording it in, by moving a knob or anything like that, I'd rather be able to have a bit more fine control over it. If I double click on the clip. So we're back into our view that we've seen before with all of our notes. But if we want to see what it calls them envelopes, actually, the automation, it'll call them envelopes. Down here, there's quite a lot of these things in live where there'll be little buttons to show and hide different aspects of the user interface, in order to give yourself a bit more space. But if we click this is the show hide envelopes box. If I click on that, now you'll see this line. This line is the tiny little change that I just did to the delay. Now, there's a couple of ways to find all the different controls, all the different things that you have changed. So this little drop-down menu here, I'm just going to put it back to how it normally is by clicking there. This will give you, the top part will give you a list of all of the devices on that track. So instrument rack is actually just my little synth instrument, and delay is that delay effect, and actually it'll also allow you, instead of controlling the instrument rack, to control the thing inside the instrument rack, to also control the mixer. I mean, this in here, you can go in and see every single control that is possible to automate, and that can be quite a lot of stuff. So if I click on instrument rack, then the next drop-down menu will show me all of the things there that are possible, and the ones with the red dots are the ones that I've done anything to. So that's this here. That's all the movement that I did to that filter knob. If I want, I can click in here. If I think that what I did to that was absolute nonsense, I can just right-click and say clear envelope, and then it's all gone. Whatever I was up to is gone. There's a couple of easier ways to maybe get to what it is that you want to see in here. The way that I would usually do it, I'm just going to undo deleting all of that with Command Z. For me, the easiest way is actually I'm just double clicking on the track to bring me back to the instrument. If you actually just click on a parameter, so actually we were just looking at the filter. So say I want to see the drive, you just have to click in the right place. You'll see there's a very light little corners of a box around it to show that it's selected. Now if I go back, double click in there, it'll show you the automation for the last thing that you had selected. So that's quite a useful way of getting quickly to the parameter that you want to see. Another quite handy little thing just in this view, if you click in the top one and right at the bottom, it's only show adjusted envelopes, which means it'll only show you in the list the things that you've actually recorded any automation into, because there can be a heck of a lot of parameters in here to get through to find the thing that you want to find. So if you say only show adjusted, now when I open the top one, it's only showing me the things I've already recorded some automation on, and that just makes it a little bit easier to find that stuff. So yeah, that's the basics of doing that inside session view. And if I hold on this, press tab and copy it over into the arrangement, it should, yes, it'll copy that over with all the automation that I did. So I'm just going to play this clip in here, and you'll see it's doing the same thing. So let's talk about doing it in the arrangement view. The workflow is relatively similar. One of the changes they made in Live 10, which actually I really like, is that by default you won't see the automation. What you have to do is press the A button on your keyboard. That switches in and out of viewing the automation. So this is my main synth track. That is my filter drive there. And just like when you're inside that clip view, you've got a little drop-down menu here to view different things in the lane. And that's pretty good. You can also, if you want, you can click this little add button, and it'll just add another, it'll add in another lane to view another thing. So you can have lots of different things. You can view lots of different things, view and edit lots of different parameters at the same time, which can be really useful if you're trying to do some crazy automation on lots of different stuff. And that's really useful. So as well as being as well as obviously recording it in live, you can also draw stuff in various different ways. I'm just going to find one. I'm just going to change this back to that filter frequency. If you click in the empty space here, I'm going to right click and oh, I've deleted everything. Of course I have. I should be able to clear the envelope. There we go. I'm just going to select all of the stuff there and clear this envelope out. So just like when we were drawing in notes in MIDI clips, you can press the B button or you can click up here where there's a little pencil, and that'll put you in and out of draw mode. So if I've got my little pencil here, I can actually just click and drag, and I can draw something in. Now you will maybe be noticing that it's drawing things with a little sort of staircase. That is the default way that it will draw, is that whatever the grid is set to here, so you can see that it's whatever the grid is set to, it's going to put in steps of that size, which may be useful to you and may not. The adaptive grid is on, so if I zoom in more and then draw again, you'll see that it's now drawing it with smaller steps for smaller feet. And yeah, you'll see playing that back that it's doing much the same. You can also, I always need to remember what the keyboard modifiers are in this. Yes. If you hold down Command on a Mac, and I believe it will be Control on Windows while you're drawing, it will draw a nice smooth line, which is quite good. So yeah, that's how you would get it to be a more smooth line. That's a bit of a weird thing. I'm just gonna click and drag over all of this. I'm just gonna drag over this one lane again, and I'm just gonna right click and delete. You can also just press your delete key. Another way to do it, excuse me, if you're not in draw mode, if you're just in your normal select mode, you can actually just click anywhere on the line and it'll create a point. And you can click somewhere else and it'll create a point, and then you can click on these. If you have to be careful with the mouse, that you make sure you can, hopefully you can see that when you move over that point that it changes colour to a sort of bluey colour. And if I click and drag that, now I just get a nice clean, a nice clean ramp between those 2 points. And if I click maybe over here, make a new one, I can have a nice clean line up and down, and that'll be really smooth lines. And you can see this is the filter parameter. It's moving in nice clean lines. I guess that one other thing that you just so you know, you can always click somewhere in the middle of a line and drag that if you want to move it around. You can also, if you click, you can move points around. You can move them up and down. And in one of the newer features in Live, if you have to be careful about the way you're selecting things, but if you move the mouse so that the whole line is selected, and then hold down the Alt key, you'll see that this little curve appears beside the mouse pointer. Now, if you click and drag, it'll actually do it'll do Bezier curves, a bit like in drawing software, and depending where you've clicked, it will do different curves. It just allows you to do less linear things. But this is a whole thing. You can spend hours automating different parameters to make crazy things happen. You can also, I mean, one of the, obviously automating cool synth parameters and effects and things is a really great thing to do for sort of sound design and making things your own. I mean, another thing that you might want to just do is, through your song, you might just want to automate the volume of things, and that you can do that the same way. I am just going to go. I'm going to show all parameters again so that I can find what I want. Go back into this top menu and select mixer, and there you'll find all the basic mixer parameters. Speaker on, which is actually just whether the track is muted or not. Your track panning. If anybody doesn't know, panning is panorama. You can make it move more towards the left speaker, more towards the right speaker. And track volume. So, if I just wanted this track to fade up from, I could have it fade up from nothing over the course of 8 bars. So I've just made a point there, and now you can see the track volume over there is going to fade up over 8 bars, and that's quite a nice thing to do. I'm just going to undo that, and you can also you can go in and start doing things if you really want. You could you can draw quite extreme automation. I can just start pulling the volume down. Maybe I want that to happen all the time. It is possible to go over here, select this 1 bar of automation that I've drawn, and duplicate it. And actually I can duplicate that all the way along. Not quite sure what this is going to sound like, but we'll find out in a minute. I'm not sure if it's going to make it into the final track, but the automating things like volume and things, can let you do things to quite creatively. I'm just going to undo that all because I don't think that's a particularly wonderful bit of automation. But so yeah, and it's worth noting also. This is a way I quite like to. I'm just going to delete this track that I've automated, and you'll notice when I deleted that track, all the little red dots down here disappeared, because now there's actually no more automation in this arrangement for those parameters. But a way that I like to use this automation, so I've actually got I've put a little arrangement together of this track. I put this together yesterday. Quite often what I'll do once I've sort of copied and pasted some stuff, moved some stuff around, and got a rough start to end of which parts come in and out, is you can in arrangement view you actually don't need to record enable any tracks, and it's actually probably better if you're only doing automation that you don't. The only difference with recording in automation live this way is instead of using this is the session record button, so it's used to record into clips in session view, and this is just the main record button. So if I press this now, there's no tracks actually record enabled, so I'm not recording any notes or anything into any parts. I'm not recording any audio in, but any parameter that I touch while I'm playing through the song will get recorded. So I quite often like to just run through the song, especially like I write a lot of quite synthy music, so I'll quite often just go through the song and just tweak some of these parameters to give stuff a bit of movement, and I can move to a different track and do that as well, and anything that I do will be recorded. you can just do multiple takes through, you know, record if you want to concentrate on some parameters for one for one track on one go through, and then do parameters for another track. Yeah, the world's your oyster, and everything that you've recorded in, you'll be able to go in and, you know, if you've done it a little bit sloppily, you can go in and fine tune it in here. So yeah, that is the basics of how you can do automation. It's also worth, I maybe didn't, I don't think I mentioned that you are also able to, I'm just going to quickly record some automation down there. Stop it. So now you can see these once again have their little red circle to show that they've got automation. A quick way, if I want to get rid of the automation I did to that filter, I can actually just right click on the knob and say delete automation from there, and it'll clear out all the automation that I did to that. And it's the same with pretty much everything. If I'd automated some of the volume or the pan or anything, and I decide that what I've done is absolute guff and I have no interest in it anymore, you can just right click from the actual control and just say delete automation, and whatever nonsense I was up to will be thrown in the bin, and that'll all be fine. So that's a bit of that. Now, doing the twisting knobs, twisting knobs on a screen is all well and good, but what I haven't really touched upon at all in these workshops and is how to use MIDI controllers and things in order to control stuff within Live, and that is, especially when Ableton Live 1 first came out, the way that you could very easily set up some sort of controller. You know, if you have a controller with some knobs on it or some sliders or some buttons that send MIDI messages, the ease with which you could set up that stuff to immediately control parameters within your computer software was totally revolutionary when Live first came out. Excuse me. So the fact that I haven't covered it is a little bit of a travesty. So just gonna switch over camera here. So I've got this little Novation controller. It's got 16 knobs. It's got some buttons, and yeah, I'll show you. You might not have a MIDI controller plugged in, and that's okay if you don't. I'm just going to show you quickly a couple of ways you can use this. But if you don't have a controller plugged in, don't worry, because in a minute I'm going to show you how to control some things also just from your computer keyboard. Maybe not quite as elegant a solution, but it's also a really useful way of doing things. So that's where this button up here comes in, which is the MIDI map mode switch. If I click this, you'll see lots of stuff has lit up in blue. And everything that lights up in blue is something that you can map to be controlled from MIDI. I'll very quickly mention just in the settings. This is settings. This is the MIDI part. I have like an embarrassment of MIDI interfaces plugged into this computer, but this particular device is this one here. It is the launch control. If you want to be controlling live parameters that way, you need to make sure that in the row for that device that remote is switched to on, otherwise it's not going to work. But in my case it is. So once again, I'm going to click this MIDI button here. The keyboard shortcut is Command, that's Apple, and M, or Control M if you're on Windows. And yeah, look at all this stuff that's lit up in blue. So I can, well, I'm going to click on this filter frequency. I'm going to move this first knob here. So that just means Ableton will get a little bit of a message from that and go, oh, right, that's what that message is. And it's now assigned that. So if I switch back out, you need to make sure you switch back out of the MIDI mode, and I twist this knob, you will see this filter frequency now moves, and I've got instant control over it, and that's really, really good. And maybe I can just quickly go, boof, that's the second one, boof, that's the third one. I'm going to map these envelope parameters as well, and now I'm just going to loop on here. Now with one little... I didn't map. Did I not do the third one? Oh, I did the third one. Oh, I didn't. I twisted the wrong knob. And now I've got a few controls, and suddenly I've got totally hands-on control of that synth, and I can, suddenly I've got something I can really, really play with. And that's great fun. How is everybody doing so far? I'm not going to maybe spend too much time on this MIDI control stuff. If you don't have a MIDI controller, obviously it's not immediately relevant to you. But that is why it's really great if you have a MIDI keyboard, a USB MIDI keyboard with a few knobs or some sliders or something. Doing stuff like this, suddenly Ableton becomes much more of an instrument. It can become much less of having to click things on a computer screen and all that stuff, which can feel a bit dry and dull. And suddenly you have some real control over stuff. I think I was going to cover another thing. Well, actually, no. I'm going to continue talking about MIDI controllers for a little bit longer, because it's great, and if I cover another couple of things, hopefully that will also be useful to you. And obviously you can control you can really control anything in the whole thing. So maybe if this was something I was going to be using for a live show, maybe I would want to map. I'm not actually sure how these buttons are set up. I'm just using these buttons at the bottom, and I'm getting the mute controls for tracks. So I'm just going through. Okay, I'll just do these first 5. And close Facebook. I don't know if you guys are hearing my notifications, but I'll make sure that we're not. And now, well, I'm just gonna set this whole. Just gonna ignore my arrangement at the moment and set all these tracks to play. But now I've got control over all the mutes, so I can, I could really quickly just be like bringing stuff in and out. And now I've got kind of real control over stuff really quickly, and a few little, 30 seconds spent mapping stuff, and now we've got something we've got real control over. I'm only playing a few clips, but really quickly I can be bringing this stuff in and out. And it doesn't have to be the mutes that you're doing. It's also just worth noting, while you're in MIDI mode, this left part will give you a full list of everything that you have assigned, and that can be quite useful. Also, and this is another thing that's great. So we can see. Okay, this is where I mapped that filter frequency knob, and by default, it's going to make it so that this knob that I assigned will just make it go from the lowest possible parameter, the lowest that you, the lowest it can be to the highest it can be, and it'll show you this here. So by default, that's what it's going to do. Lowest it can be to the highest it can be. Maybe you don't want that. Maybe maybe I don't want this filter thing to ever go below here with this knob. So if I move this up a bit, now this knob at the very bottom is only going to start 2/3 of the way up, because that's what I set it to there. I'm going to move it down a bit, but yeah. So you can customize a little bit about how that works. Joe's asked about mapping drums to the pads. I'm going to get to that in a little minute. You can also, just to point it out, I could set the minimum to the top and the maximum to the bottom, and now it's going to go backwards, which can be really useful. One more thing that's worth mentioning while we're talking about what you can do with one knob. I don't have to only have one parameter mapped to one knob. I could have this knob do the filter frequency, but I could also click on something else, do that. Ableton's fine with that. So now it's actually going to control two things at once. I'm just going to switch that track back on. And I'm not sure if I've done anything that useful. I'm going to flip these parameters back around to see if that makes it do something nicer. So now, as I turn up this filter, it's also turning up this send. I haven't really covered sends, but this is basically sending that track into one of these two send tracks over here, one of which has a big reverb. So yeah, there's a lot of customization, and I might go into what's called macros a little bit in a minute, which is like taking that and exploding it into the ether. It's really amazing. Joe, you're asking about mapping drums to the pads, so you're basically talking about how you to the pads on this. Yes, there are ways of doing it. It's a slightly complex question because these actually do send notes. One thing to mention. So actually, this is more specific to this particular controller. Is that these pads here actually send note messages. Ableton doesn't really care what message it gets when you're mapping stuff. It'll map it'll map notes. So if you have a MIDI keyboard plugged in, if you're in the position where you have a keyboard that's just a keyboard, doesn't have any knobs, it is still possible to map the keys on your keyboard. Maybe to switch stuff on and off. So you could say you're going to be maybe playing a keyboard thing live, but you still want to be able to control stuff. You could maybe map some of the keys at the bottom or the top, the ones that might be a bit out of the way, to control some stuff. And what it'll do is it basically stops that. If you map that bottom keyboard key to switch a track on and off or whatever you've mapped it to, that note will no longer get to any synth you're playing, which is quite useful. It'll just, when it gets that message, it'll go, cool, that's controlling that, and it's not going to control my keyboard anymore. Joe was asking about mapping stuff to pads. That's a little bit more complex because really the drum racks act just like you've got a MIDI keyboard plugged in. So if you play the right note, it'll play the right pad. I'm just going to undo this. I'm I'm just this is a way you can quickly get rid of MIDI mappings. I'm gonna get rid of all this mapping uh, of these pads so that I can use them for something else. If I have this track record enabled and play these pads, you'll actually see that they are they're actually playing notes. They're just, there's another thing I never mentioned, is that these drum racks, obviously we've got these 16 things here, but these drum racks are actually huge. If you click in this little bit here, you can scroll up and down, and they've actually got 128 cells in them. So you can actually have a drum kit with 128 different sounds in it. Actually, there are ways of making that drum kit with 128 sounds in it have something like 16,000 sounds in them if you really want to go down that route. Probably the easiest way, if I wanted to use this controller to control these pads, would actually be to go into the editor software for the controller and change the messages that these pads send into the ones that are being the correct notes for the drum pads in Ableton, because yeah, that's the simplest way to do it. I'm going to only half ignore that question because it's a good question, but I don't have a really solid answer that can apply to everybody on that one. Another thing that is quite interesting in Ableton. So we talked a little bit before about racks. I think maybe Chris asked in previous weeks about how you could save your synth with all of the effects on it all together. So I thought I would talk a little bit about how you can about rack controls. About putting things into racks, and about macro controls. So this is my bass synth here. It is. It's just the same sort of thing as all the other ones. It was just those little tiny snippet synth samples that I gave everybody last week, with some stuff going on it. But I'd quite like to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just right click on the title bar, and I'm going to say group. And Ableton's going to have a little think for a minute. And you'll see not much has actually changed there, but what it's done is it's put it inside an instrument rack. And in order to see what I want to see, I'm going to click Show Hide Macro Controls. Now, these macro controls are basically a way of taking things from sort of inside this rack, because there are so many parameters on this sampler. What I want to do is I want to find the ones I'm most interested in, and then have them just available over here so that I can get to them easily and I don't have to bother about this. And that's actually, if you look at this main synth, that's actually what I've already done with those ones. So I'm just going to do similar over here. So all you have to do, anything inside the rack, I'm going to right click in it, I'm going to say map to macro 1. And now you'll notice I can't actually control that from there anymore, but now my filter frequency is over there. I'm a big fan of having control of filters. I love filters. They're great fun to play with. They sound great. So I've just right-clicked on the second one, the resonance one, and mapped that to the second macro. I quite like this drive parameter. I'm not going to use that one. I'll have the drive parameter. I'm going to right-click, map to macro 3. And actually, I quite like this filter envelope amount, map to macro 4. And now I've got control of them somewhere that's easy to get to. You can, yeah, there's also that map mode, but I'm going to ignore that for now. You can also do it by clicking on this map mode and then clicking on a parameter and pressing one of these map buttons here. I prefer doing it the right click way. I also quite like having control of the envelope controls, and actually, uh, I have a lot of well, certainly the first synthesizer I had was quite a simple analog synthesizer, and it you know, when we were doing stuff last week, we were playing with our filter envelope, and then there was a different one that controls the amplitude or the volume. Yes, Chris. Basically, I'm putting this into an instrument rack uh, to demonstrate these macro controls. Um, and also because a lot of the preset instruments in Ableton will be inside instrument racks, which kind of makes them a bit like, like you don't really know what's going on inside them. So I'm kind of showing you maybe some of the way that they've even created those racks. Um, so yeah, what I'm getting at here is that I'd actually just like to control both these envelopes at the same time. I quite like doing that. So I'm going to map this attack parameter to macro 5, and I'm going to map this one over here to macro 5 as well. And now if I do that, it controls both of them at once. And I really like that. It's useful. So I'm just going to go through map to macro. Oh no, I just did that to the wrong one. Let's this is how you undo it. You can right click on it and say unmap, and also unmap because I wanted to map them to number 6 and number 6. I'm going to do this to number 7 and this to number 7 and this to number 8 and this to number 8. And now I've got a little instrument where I've got some easy controls. I've also totally knackered that so yeah, that's a way of getting quite easy control of stuff. I'm quite a fan of that. And I guess one of your questions might be, why would you want to do that? There are several answers to that question. Also, just while I'm at it, you can also rename macro controls. I'm going to just rename that one attack, right click, rename, decay, right click, rename, sustain. Oh, come on, Gav. Sustain, yes, got there, and release. There are several reasons. One reason is I'm just gonna go and delete all of this MIDI control stuff that I did earlier on. So now nothing is assigned to anything. So the way I was showing you how to map things there, it's kind of the old school way of doing things in Ableton, and it's still very useful. That's how things worked in version 1, and you can absolutely still do that, and it's great, and it's a really good way of you having exactly the controls that you need over multiple tracks, all mapped onto one controller, and that's wonderful. But these days, they've actually got a kind of intelligent way of doing it. Now, this depends slightly on what controller you have and the way that the manufacturer has set it up. But a lot of stuff, particularly Novation, are extremely good for it. Akai, but most MIDI controllers made in the last sort of 10 years will have as part of the little software that installs with them what's called a control surface script, okay, for Ableton. So this is where this control surface section in the MIDI part of the settings comes in. So I just have to say that my control surface is a launch, what's mine called? It's called a launch control. So I select launch control, you say where it's coming from, where it's connected to, and actually this device, the computer sees it as being called launch control. So that's that, and that's that. And what they'll have done, now this, exactly how it works depends totally on on the manufacturer and how they've set it up. Obviously, different controllers have different layouts of controls, different layouts of knobs. I'm going to see if this is actually working. Yes, it is. I'm not going to go too far into this because I have one specific controller. So this one actually has a way of kind of switching modes by holding down a button and pressing a thing. That's not really important, but it's quite standard for them to do something where you'll have one mode that where the knobs map to volume parameters. So I think how they've set this up is that the bottom row of knobs is controlling volumes, and it's actually, so it'll just control the volumes of the first 8 tracks, which is cool. And then the top row of knobs is controlling the pan. And I can't quite remember how they've set these up. Oh yeah, there's a and actually I can bank, so you'll see at the bottom here it's now changing it so that they would control 9 to 13. This stuff's all going to be kind of specific, a bit specific to what controller you have. So they usually have some sort of mixer mode. This one, I think they've set it up so that it also has some sort of clip launching mode using these buttons. So basically, it's a sort of intelligent control. There's some sort of a layer of software in between the controller and Ableton that intelligently remaps the controllers in order to work out if your if your controller has this. You'd maybe have to look on the website for your particular controller. There is also a way, if you have a controller that doesn't have a pre-made sort of map for it, there are ways of actually making one. I'm not going to go too far into it. What I really like it for, I believe the third mode they've made here on this is, well, what I like to call the blue hand. So if you have a controller that's set up in this way, you'll see this little blue hand appears on the title bars of things. When you've got a controller that can work in this way, it basically means you have 8 knobs, and whatever device is controlled, whatever device has the little blue hand on it, whichever one you've selected on any track, these 8 knobs are going to control the first 8 parameters on it. So I can do stuff on this track. Remember, this is me with nothing mapped in here. It just allows me to have these 8 knobs that will control these first 8 parameters on this track, and I can control them. But now if I go and select this next track, and you'll see it now, it's got the blue hand on it. It's not actually playing, but it controls that. So it's a level of sort of intelligent MIDI control. I'm going to leave that alone now. I'm just going to show you one more thing that is quite a fun thing that you can do with macros. Maybe I'll have a little listen to what's on this high synth part. Oh, that's quite piercing. There you go. I'm just going to turn that down a little bit. So I'm just going to stop that for now. I'm going to take this track has a reverb effect on it. I'm going to take that reverb effect. I'm just going to click on it. I'm going to say group. So that is now inside inside one of these little racks. And I'm gonna find another effect. I'm gonna find something else. I think I'm quite a fan of the saturator effect. It is quite fun. Now, what I want to do, really, I want one knob that's going to make something brilliant happen. That's what I really want. I want one knob to make something excellent happen. I'm a big fan of that. If you can set up one knob that controls a few different parameters in just the right way, you can have one knob that does a really cool effect. So what I want one of these macro knobs, when you turn it up, to make everything more distorted and make the reverb bigger and make the mix to the reverb get more. So how am I going to do that? Right, first parameter I want is this drive. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say map to macro 1. Okay, so now... Okay. So my first problem is that when I'm turning that up, it's getting really loud. Don't like it. Unhappy. Terrible. So let's fix that. I'm actually just going to click on this map mode, because if you go into map mode, you can see like some other things, like when we're doing the MIDI mapping before. I can set a minimum and maximum. So firstly, I'm just going to set the minimum to be at 0, which is just the sort of default, and I'm going to set the maximum to be 12, let's say. And if I go out of that, okay, now it goes. It still gets quite loud, but now it's just going to do a little bit of stuff. Let's carry on with that. So that's fine. It's making it more distorted. That's a good start. I like that. It's making it a bit too loud. I don't like that. So there's also an output control on this. So I'm just going to click on that and click map over here. Now you'll see if I do that now, the output's doing it's doing its full sweep from pretty much doing nothing to probably being far too loud. So I'm going to go back into this mapping mode. All I wanted to do is go from 0, which is its default parameter, to maybe minus 10. Let's try that. So now, as I turn up the distortion, the output volume turns down, which is great. So suddenly I have an effect where I can affect the tone. I can make it more distorted, but it doesn't get too loud, and that's really useful for me. And I can fine tune these parameters if I want. Maybe I want the drive to be able to get a little bit nastier, and maybe I'm gonna make it so that the output volume comes down a bit more as a result of that. So now we've got one knob that's doing some quite cool stuff. I don't think that one knob's cool enough yet. I think it could be a lot cooler. So I'm going to assign some of these reverb controls to it as well. Boof, let's make the decay time assigned to it, and let's make the dry wet control also assigned to it. So at the moment, when we turn it up, it's going to be pretty extreme. I'm just going to hide this so we can see things a bit closer. If I go back into map mode, once again, I can tailor the response to what I want. So I don't want the reverb to ever get too small. I'm going to make it start at about just under a second. 60 seconds is perhaps a little bit extreme at the top end, so 20 is still quite extreme, but now that control will go from pretty small to pretty big. And the dry wet, I don't want it to ever be all the way dry, so I'm going to make it start at, say, 20%. And actually, I think I will have it go all the way to 100%. So now I have a control that goes from pretty normal to totally sent off into the ether. And you can keep going with that, you know. I could add in more effects if I wanted. I don't know what. I won't. It's okay. I'll leave it. But yeah, so that's ways that you can chain together effects parameters in order to create your own sort of custom effects. And hey, if I've got that MIDI controller switched on, then hey, put my little blue hand on it, and great. And obviously, this is something I can automate. Now I've made that cool effect. If I'm going to go back to my main arrangement of the song. I've clicked my back to arrangement. I'm going to find where that high synth comes in. Hey, there's that high synth. I like that guy. And hey, let's record some. Make sure nothing's record enabled. great effect. We've made one knob control a whole ton of things. And I quite enjoyed it. Hopefully that made some semblance of sense to you. So yeah, the racks inside Ableton are very powerful. It's also, I mean, I'll mention it quickly. You'll notice there's this thing saying chain here. I now have fresh coffee, which is wonderful. You could actually add another chain. I'm not going to go too far into this, but if I added some effects on this chain, these would actually be parallel. So the sound would go through one chain while simultaneously going through the other chain and coming out at the end. So you could have actually two completely different chains of effects that are both happening at once, and you could just have another one and another one and another one if you want. And all these chains have a little volume control of their own, because obviously if you're sort of multiplying the sound a lot of times, stuff might get loud. But yeah, you can go hog wild with stuff you can do with the racks in Ableton. You can really go absolutely crazy. It's pretty good. I'm a big fan of just using them to do effects like that, where you have several parameters all happening at once that all add up into something cool. I'm also, you might have been able to tell, I'm a big fan of lots of reverb and lots of delay. Right, let me consult the oracle. Yes. I said that I would. I think I got a bit too excited about all the MIDI control. It is also worth noting that not only can you control things by MIDI, you can also control things from just your computer keyboard. I wonder if I can get this camera to show my computer keyboard. There we go. That'll just about do it. It's a little bit wonky, but that's fine. Now, obviously, the keys on your keyboard are only really sort of pressing. They can only really be on or off. So you can't necessarily control sort of. Well, you can control knobs with them, but you can't really get any fine control. So instead of pressing MIDI up here, or Command M, you can press key. And it basically works the same way, except it goes a different color. So I can click on a parameter, press a key on my keyboard. So maybe I just want to do some mutes again. I've just done A and S and D and F and G. And if I go back out of that mode by pressing key up here, or by Apple K or Control K. Now if I play these things, those chords are very loud. You can also use it to control parameters. For instance, I mean, I have these sends. I should explain what sends are. I will in a moment. I'm just gonna. This is a send knob that will send that channel, the sound from that channel into a big reverb. Maybe I'm just gonna have that as being Z, and maybe I'm gonna make this synth and this, and I'm gonna have some buttons that do that. If you just listen to the, so yeah, I can have just a key that sends that into that big reverb effect. And you have the same control over this as before. You can set a minimum and maximum. So maybe I don't actually want that. what was it? It was Z, I think, is the one. Maybe I don't want it to send it at full volume. Maybe I only want it to send it a little. I mean, that's a lie. I always want maximum reverb. I love reverb. But now you'll see when I press Z, yeah, it's only turning up 2/3 of the way. It's also quite useful for there's odd things you can MIDI map, like that are not necessarily sound related parameters, but you can, for instance, if you click on the title bar of a device, you can actually MIDI map that, and what that'll do is wherever you are, if I press that command, it just snaps you right back to that device, which can be great just to get back to where you want to. I mean, I use that. In my live show, I have one analog synthesizer that goes out of tune quite a lot, and I just have a key on my keyboard that when I press it, it shows me the tuner, so that I can get to the tuner really quickly and get the synth back in tune. You can also do it for just selecting particular tracks. If you excuse me, I should be on keyboard mode. I think I've just done number 6. If I now press number 6, it just selects that track. You can do mutes and solos and sends, any of these parameters here. So yeah, you've also got your keyboard as something you can set up to control things in much the same way. I didn't really talk much about the fact that we have what's called send effects. Some of you might know how sends and returns work, and some of you might not. Obviously, we have a mixer. We've got a mixer with faders, and that's this fader is basically how much of this track gets sent to the main mix. The main mix that everybody's listening to. But there's also these sends here. So you can think of them as like a sort of separate mix. It's like you've got this is how much goes to the main mix, and there's 2 sends, which say how much of this track gets sent to some send tracks, and actually they call them this is the send, and these are actually the return tracks. So I've got in the first one, which is A, so you'll see there's an A knob here. I've got a reverb. I've actually got in fairly me style, a pretty blooming big reverb, because that's how I like it. But it means you can send all the tracks to the same effect, which can be useful. Being as I am very old, well, not that old, but old enough that I did learn studio technique on an analog mixing desk, and in the old days, if somebody had a reverb unit, they probably had one reverb unit. They weren't working in software, and where you could just drag a reverb effect onto any track that you want. They might only have one reverb unit, and it would be quite expensive. So that's, you would have a reverb unit linked up to the sends on your desk, so that you could send a little bit of any tracks that you want to reverb on to your one reverb unit. Is there a mixer? Yes, there is a mixer on the arrangement page. It's just that it looks slightly different, and that's an excellent thing that I did not mention. See this? See this here? This is your volume. So if you're mapping this little bit, which is the volume, is the same as the fader on the session page. I can happily demonstrate that by mapping that knob to it, and you'll see that parameter is going up and down. And if I flick over to the other side, you'll see that the fader is here. So yeah, they've just obviously had to make it a bit smaller. But yes, that there where it has the little number, which is actually it's the track volume in decibels, or probably dBA. Yes, no, sorry, dBFS. Which I'm not going to get into at all. And this this one here is actually your pan. They've just had to make them a little bit smaller, so you can see that's going left and that's going right. But they are exactly the same control. What was I doing? I was chuntering on about the old days. But yeah, sends are so you can basically send a little bit of every track to. In this case, there's a reverb and there's a delay set up. In the full version of Live, you can actually have as many. Well, at least I'm not sure if I've found a limit to the return tracks. There probably is. There probably is a limit. I'm currently using Live Intro where I can only have 2. But if I, just to show you how it works, I've just deleted one of them. And if you want to have a new one, I can right click and say insert return track, or you can also go up to create up here. There are always several ways to do everything. Insert a new return track, and that will be my B return, which currently is empty. There's nothing in it. I can send things to it, but it'll kind of just make them a bit louder. But I could, for instance, put in I'll just put in a delay like was on it. Generally, if you're putting things on a return track, I would put the dry wet control to all the way wet, because you're already going to hear the unaffected track through the main mix. But yeah, now I've got that's my, and you'll see that's getting sent to that delay. It's very useful for, well, here's a good example of what it's useful for. Also, I'm just going to I'm just going to drag all these tracks out of the group they're in, because I haven't shown you how to use groups yet, and that was very naughty of me. Oh. And that has changed slightly, and I can't do it. There we go. So I had I recorded some little vocals. And vocals and stuff like that. That's the sort of thing where I will almost always use a send track, because if I've stacked up 8 tracks of vocals, I don't want to be putting a reverb effect on every single track. Do excuse me while I have a little argument with Ableton, because I have they've changed the way that groups work slightly, or else I'm just being dumb. There we go. And I'm just gonna delete that. Yeah, if I want a bit of reverb on all of my vocals, I could just put a reverb effect on every track, but it's always worth remembering, especially because I've been making music with laptops since, well, for about 20 years, and since the point where laptops were starting to be strong enough to do so. But every effect that you add is another bit of thinking that your computer has to do. Every instrument that you add, every effect that you add to your session is a little bit more thinking that your computer has to do. And computers these days are quite powerful, but you can. I think I still come from the mindset of trying to minimize these things. So if I have these, let's see how abhorrent I'm going to find it. Listen to my voice. By the way, just I'm sure we've already talked about it, but just in case, the S button here is solo, which just lets you listen to a single track on its own. Oh, there we go. Beautiful. You can also, if you hold down Shift, no, not Shift. Do excuse me while I forget the things there. Sorry, Command Apple. You can select multiple, or you can actually select if you click on a track name, hold Shift, click on the bottom one, that'll select all of them in between. And now if you hold Alt with multiple tracks selected and click on any parameter like mute or solo, it will do all of them at once. I'm just doing that so that I can solo all of my vocals. I'm just going to flick back over here because it's easier to see the sends here. But yeah, I could bung a reverb on every single track, but that's going to make my computer have to do an awful lot of thinking. So actually, because I've got all the tracks selected, if I move the send knob, it's actually going to do all of them at once. But if I didn't have them all selected, you know, I can just go through. Excuse me, I still have them all selected. There we go. Just had to click. You know, I can just go through and send however much of each track. Maybe I want absolutely tons of reverb. And maybe I want to pan them around a bit in the stereo field. And now I got reverb on all my vocals using only one reverb instead of having to put one on every track. And, you know, I could send some of my synths to the same reverb, and often having the same reverb on lots of stuff puts them in the same space, and that can be quite useful in terms of your mix. So that's a little bit about how send and return tracks work. You do also then have a fader for just how much of that reverb unit goes then to the main mix. You know, it's just like another channel. Just looking at my little list of things to cover today. Okay, I feel like we've got through a decent amount of these things. Just going to allow everyone a moment. Hopefully, you're all doing exciting things instead of staring at me, hoping that I'm going to do something. Let's get my face back. There's my face. So another thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is the idea of, well, plugins. Basically, obviously we've been using all of some of the instruments that come with Ableton and the effects that come built into Ableton, which generally are really good. Actually, there's some really high quality effects that you get with Ableton. I use a lot of them as my go-tos because they work really well. But there's also this this tab called plugins. So plugins are basically extra software written by other people that plugs into Ableton. And there is an absolute ton of plugins available in the world, which will take the form of either effects, you know, like your reverbs and your delays and all sorts of outlandish effects, or you know, there's quite a lot of things available that are emulations of classic mixing desks, or the equalizers from classic mixing desks, or compressors, or things like that. And then there are also an awful lot of instruments, which, you know, might be sort of analog synthesizers or sample libraries of lots of different, you know, electric pianos or orchestras or things like that. Obviously, there's a lot of this that costs hundreds of pounds. Which, you know, some of which is extremely high quality and very much worth the money, but maybe only worth the money if you're doing this as a commercial enterprise. There's also a heck of a lot of free plugins available. I'm not going to go over how to install them. Generally, stuff that you download like that, it installs like any other software, and once it's installed, it should appear in this plugins bit. The only real difference, I'll find something. For instance, I've got a whole load of stuff. I've got a mix of stuff I've paid for and some freely available stuff. Maybe I'm just going to make a new track, a new MIDI track. So, for instance, this is a little freely available one called Synth 1. So the only real difference with the plugins is that instead of their controls appearing down here, you know, this Ableton have made their things come up very nicely down here, whereas plugins will have a little window of their own because they've made their own. They'll all have made their own graphical user interface. So there's this little wrench. I believe it's a wrench, which just shows or hides the window for the plugin. And so this is actually a little synthesizer. Oh, I don't have a keyboard plugged in today. Let's get my little computer MIDI keyboard active. So yeah, your main difference here is just that you have to do stuff. Excuse me, while it says "A" all over the screen. Is that you have to do the controls up here. Some things, if you this is just a little show hide button. Depending on what you bring in, some things will actually already have the controls down here, and some things won't. It sort of depends. I'm just going to see if I can find you one where it comes up. Oh, here's one of my Sound Toys plugins, which probably will come up okay. So actually this one, if you do this to open it out, it actually has all the controls down here. And you can it also has quite a nice looking graphical user interface as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on this particular aspect, but quite often if they don't have the controls down here, it's because there's a limitation with Ableton. They will only let you some of these plugins have enormous amounts of parameters in them, and if they have more than 128, Ableton will only let you automate 128 of them. I'm sure we can probably live with that limitation, but it just means there's this little thing where you have to press configure and then go and twiddle some knobs in the thing, and they'll appear here. Which can actually be quite nice, a bit, almost a bit like that kind of macro thing of just being able to grab the ones that you want and have them freely available and not always have to bring up the plugin window. Obviously, every this is a synth. Every plugin is different. I actually might before the end just try and maybe bung a little text file up on screen with some good sources of free plugins, because there's a lot of really good stuff out there. There's a lot of commercial companies giving away some, who sell sampled instruments, but they'll give away a certain amount of them for free. All you usually just have to sign up, give them your email address, whatever, so they can spam you a little bit. But there's some really great stuff out there. I've lost my train of thought for a minute there, but yes, plugins, basically just a way of adding more instruments and effects, and they can really take the form of just about anything, synthesizers, effects, and they mostly just work the same way, with the exception that they will usually have a window that pops up over, and you just have to click the little wrench. And that's plugins. That's roughly what they do. What else was I wanting to cover? Yes. This is one that actually my this is one that seems to be my brother was asking me about this because it always seems to trip him up. I quite often make music that never changes tempo, so it's never as important to me. But obviously we did cover the fact that up here there is that's where you change the overall project tempo. But like anything else, obviously music is allowed to speed up and slow down through the song, and it is possible to automate that as well. And you actually do that by automating the master track. Excuse me while I have a little sip of coffee. If you click this little doofer, I'm sure we've probably covered the fact that there's these little basically Yes, is the answer. Can you automate all aspects of plugins in the same way as automating Ableton effects? Yes. Yes is pretty much the answer. With the only limitation, which is not much of a limitation, is that you can only automate 128 of those parameters. So as long as you're happy only being able to draw 128 automation lanes for a plugin, you are fine. The reason that this kind of little configure button thing exists is because in older versions of Ableton, it would populate this this thing with 128 parameters, but it would only populate it with the first 128 parameters of a plugin. So if the one that you wanted to automate was, the 129th parameter that the plugin shows to Ableton, then you couldn't do. Mapping a controller to it, yep, absolutely. Pretty much works the same way. You just have to make sure that it's the parameter is sort of in this part of the graphical user interface. So you just have to, if I wanted to map something that was not down there currently, I just need to make sure that I've done this configure thing and brought it down. So I don't know if I wanted to change this tempo delay time. I just need to make sure I've brought it down there. Excuse me. Well, I'll do that, and now I can just go into MIDI map mode and twist the knob, and now I'm not quite sure what I'm actually. Yeah. Now there's a little knob. So yeah, plugins generally, apart from the fact that they have their own sort of GUI, their own little user interface, they can be automated and everything pretty much the same. There might be odd little differences, that are specific to certain plugins, but there are some great ones. I mean, actually, I'll take a note of these to show you, but this plugin is called Synth One. It's available for free on the internet. If you just search for Synth One, you should find it. You might end up on a archived Japanese GeoCities website where you have to do a little bit of guesswork to find the download link, but it's actually really good. It's a really nice little synthesizer. And although it might look a bit daunting when you first look at it, you should see some things. Look, that's the controls for the amplifier envelope, just like what we were doing in Simpler. That's the controls for the filter envelope: attack, decay, sustain, release. That's the frequency and the resonance, the cutoff and the resonance of the filter, and it's also got a little saturation. And the main difference is that over here you have controls for oscillators instead of a sample. I'm not gonna explain to you totally how this synth works, but you should find that okay, there might be some other controls on it that might not make sense at first. But there is stuff. This also does have. It's another thing that might work differently on different plugins. Is just they'll have presets internally. I'm not sure if there's actually anything presets installed with this, but anyway, Synth One, excellent plugin, really good, totally free. I've been downloading a few things recently that are free. Another one that is really good. That I might as well just show you a little bit because it is really great, and you might want to break out of some of the things. This plugin, well, this is called Labs from Spitfire Audio. It's one of these things where actually when you load up this Labs plugin, there's actually a whole bunch of different bits you can download, different things. So there's this. Excuse me, I've still got delay on that, but that's quite a nice one called Soft Piano. But this is basically a little sample library plugin where they have a bunch of different, quite a lot of free stuff that you can download. Quite nice cellos and stuff. So So Spitfire Audio, totally recommend you go and check that website out. Once again, another one of these companies that make quite. Yes, that is a good idea. I might have to. Hang on. Let's just. Let's get a text edit document up. There we go. Just gonna pull up a little. Oh yeah, sign player. I'm trying to remember who made this one. I mean, if you, it's also just one of those things. If you go and Google best free plugins or best free, if you Google best free VST is one of the plugin formats. I'm not gonna really, I don't feel I really need to explain that too much, but VST is a good search term. This is, oh yes, this is. I'm trying to remember what the name of the company was here. I wonder if I'm giving away all my personal information here. Well, we know that my name's Gavin. Yeah, this actually, I believe the company is actually just called Orchestral Tools. Yeah, Orchestral Tools Layers is quite a nice one. If you're doing scoring sort of stuff, I'm just gonna make this. Let's make this writing bigger. Bigger. There you go. There we go. I'm not sure if this will stay up, but these are good things. I'll put this. I'll maybe put this back up at the end. I'm bad at getting stuff to sit on top of other stuff. I think maybe the last thing I might talk about is just some sort of basic mixing concepts. Mixing in general is like a whole, how to mix a track well is not something I can necessarily cover in 25 minutes, but I think it's a good idea to maybe cover some of the mixing tools that are available in Ableton. The effects that are not cool and funky and great and make amazing noises, the effects that are a bit less exciting but actually great tools for shaping your sound and making your mix work well. So I guess we'll tell basically mainly I'm going to talk a little bit about EQ, which is equalization, which is changing the sort of frequency spectrum, changing the maybe making something bassier or less bassy, or shaping the sound tonally. And compression, which is I'm not sure how in depth I'll get about compression, but compression is really a way of controlling dynamics, controlling volume, but also you can sort of use compression as a creative tool as well. So maybe I'll just I'm just going to solo my little main synth here. I don't actually know. I've done so many changes to this little synth today that I'm not even sure what it sounds like anymore. But if you're using the full version of Ableton, you might have EQ8, which is a fantastic equalizer. I'm actually on Live Intro, so it's I've got the most basic version of the EQ, which is called Channel EQ, which is really basic, but I think that's fine. I think that's quite a useful way of explaining it. So this is a really basic EQ. It's a 3-band EQ. It has a control for controlling low. It has a control for controlling the mid range, and it has a control for controlling the high frequencies. Now this is a really simple one. It has the high and the low ones are what are called shelving filters, which is pretty much the same. If you've ever had a hi-fi that had a high and a low, knob just to do that, but you can actually see what it does on the frequency. It just goes from a certain. I'm not actually sure where this starts, but from somewhere up, it'll just sort of shelve up all the high, which might be nice, might make it sparkle a bit more. So maybe I would turn that up just a little. It also has what is quite a useful button for mixing. This little thing here is a high pass filter. We used high pass filters in the synthesizer. Oh, my face is in the way. That happens a lot. I'm gonna get my face out of the way. I worked out how to do circle masks, but it does make me feel a little bit like I'm the baby in the Teletubbies. There we go. I've moved my face. Okay. Well, just to demonstrate again, you've got a high, which can be quite extreme. And obviously some of these things are, this can be quite kind of creative choices. There we go, floating around. So, you can, as I say, this is a very simple equalizer, but yeah, you can shape this sound a little bit with the high and the low. Low works pretty much the same way on this EQ. It's a very simple shelving filter, which just, will kind of, from a certain point down, we'll just start to just roll those lows off. This also has this little button here on this EQ is a high pass filter. We did use high pass filters a little bit in the synth there, but this is just a really fixed one, which will just cut off everything. Well, this one I believe is set from 80 hertz down. It basically just cuts off the really low frequencies, the rumble. When I'm mixing, I would generally put a high pass filter on everything that is not a bass instrument. Really clears things up. Really, a lot of instruments might just have a little bit of rumble going on at the bottom there, and pulling out that very bottom on anything that's not like your bass line or your kick drum can really clean things up. Great button to switch on. Love it. And so yeah, we just have high and low shelves. You'll notice that filter put that little slope off there, just pulling off that rumble at the bottom. So maybe I'm just gonna. I mean, I'm not going to be doing a great mix right now, but maybe I'm just going to pull some low off, because this is more of a sort of mid-rangey instrument, and maybe give it a little bit of sparkle. And then the mid-range EQ is what's called a bell curve. So it's gonna, you can see the kind of shape of it. It's going to have either push up or a little scoop out, and above it is actually you can change the frequency of that one. So one way of doing EQ this way, I quite like to turn it up. If you're trying to find a frequency that you don't like or that you do like, you can have a listen to it, turn the gain up, which is this knob here. And just sweep the frequency around, and I feel like that frequency I got to there was one that was I didn't enjoy so much, so maybe I'm going to do that. Pull that frequency back a little bit. And I may have actually just made this synth sound a bit thin and rubbish, but in context that might actually be useful if I unsolo. Anyway. I find EQs especially useful for things that you have, things that you've recorded in. You'll find a lot of these these software instruments that in Ableton have actually been, they've actually been very carefully built. They'll probably sound quite good in the mix already, but stuff you've recorded in might have been in a less than ideal environment, or just might need a little bit of tickling to make it sound good. Just to show you one more useful thing that we sort of mentioned earlier on and then forgot all about is group tracks. I mean, basically, it's a way of processing stuff all together. So I'm just going to select this top vocal track and this bottom vocal track. Basically, I can't be bothered mixing them all individually. I'm going to select them all, right click, group tracks, and now you'll see they're all, I've got 6 tracks of vocals here. They're all in this little group. There's even a little button that collapses them down so they don't take up as much space, which is just useful when you're mixing. And now if I have this group selected rather than the individual track, if I drop an effect onto the group, then it'll affect all the vocals at once, which can be quite useful. So for instance, if I just want to EQ all the vocals at once, I'm going to put this low filter on. Probably going to take off a bit of that. There we are. I just want my vocals to sound a bit more shiny. That's probably it. And you can also switch things on and off. It's quite useful if you're mixing to just have a listen, try switching things on and off, just to try and decide whether you've actually made things better. You might have EQ8. If you have EQ8, it has a little bit more control. In fact, you can have 8 bands of EQ. You can switch whether they are like this one in the middle, a bell curve type EQ. You can make them be shelves like these top and bottom ones, and you will also have a Q parameter, basically a width parameter. So you'll see how this curve is quite wide. If you have the EQ8, it also allows you to make it be like a little tiny. It can go from a very thin little scoop doing a tiny frequency range to being quite a nice wide curve. And you'll find that kind of wider curves can sound quite natural, and if you're using a very thin, slicing out a very thin part of the EQ can sound a bit less natural, but be very useful, especially with stuff you've recorded in. There might just be a nasty frequency that's to do with the room that you recorded in, or some particular aspect, or sometimes a hum, an electrical hum, or something like that. But yeah, so you can go through. It's quite good to kind of go through your tracks individually. Actually, generally, if I'm mixing, I would if I'm actually trying to mix a track, this is going to be a very quick one. This sine player track is actually nothing, so I'll delete it. I quite like pulling all the faders down to 0 and. So maybe I'll just see what my drums sound like. And they sound alright. I guess I never really mentioned drum racks, kind of just another kind of rack. So you might notice that there actually is a volume parameter. There is actually a little mixer inside the drum rack. And actually you can play with it down here. Ooh, my computer's having a little moment. Gonna allow my computer to stop having a moment. Oh, it really is having a moment. Oh, there we go. That's okay. Although hopefully you noticed there that although my computer on screen seemed to be having a moment. The sound kept going because that's the way that Ableton's been coded. They wanted it to be very much for live performance. Therefore, the audio engine is the most important thing. It has to keep playing sound if you're on stage. Where was I? Okay. If you click this little thing to expand a track that has a drum rack on it, you'll actually see you have control of the individual parts. What have I done? You'll have to excuse me. I think my computer is having a little bit of a time. I'm just going to quickly restart Ableton. We never did cover saving and loading, but you know, saving and loading, I think nobody asked about it, so I'm assuming you all know what you're doing. One little second and I'll be back up. Okay, hopefully Ableton's a bit happier. There we go. I think running the video streaming software at the same time as everything else does make things a little bit sad. But now you can see the individual parts of the drum rack, which is quite useful if I want to balance them out. And actually, I can drag effects onto these individual parts if I want to have a little work on this sort of snare drum sound that I've made out of this thing. Maybe I want to try and make it have a bit more body. I'm not sure how much I'm going to get out of it because I just don't know if the sound actually has much of that sort of frequency in it. Yeah, okay. I mean that's not great. I can also just going to put in a compressor over all of this. Actually, it might be better if I demonstrate compression over some vocals. What compression does, we're getting towards 1 o'clock, so this is probably going to be an extremely quick demonstration of how compression works. It's a way of evening out volume. That is the most basic way to put it. And what it does is, I'm just going to find this little bit of vocals, which I've turned all the way down. There we go. I'm actually just going to select, and that's a little keyboard shortcut there. So you can see this is a meter of the incoming volume. I'm just putting these, doing this on the group because it's a simple way to do it. There's a threshold control, and basically what compressor does is if things go, oh, Ableton sound's not on, haha, my apologies, I will fix that. That's what happens when you've got complex routing set up. Yep. That should be back. There we are. Cool. Thank you for pointing that out. Compressor will wait till the audio gets past a certain volume, which is set by this threshold control, and further down you put this as set, and once it gets past a certain volume, it's going to start squashing it down a bit. That's the way to think about it. It's basically just going to start pushing that down. And it's good if you've got something that's quite uneven. I mean, a lot of these vocal parts might, I was just chucking them in. You'll see as I pull this, if I pull that right down, it's going to sound quite manky. So how a compressor generally works is you're basically squashing the volume down, and then at the end of it, it'll have a gain control that brings the overall level back up again, which means that what you end up with is a more even volume level on that track. It's very easy to overdo compression and make everything sound a bit lifeless and dull and suck the life out of it all. I'm marching towards 1 o'clock, so I'm not necessarily going to tell you all about compression, but it can be quite useful. It's probably worth having a little look at I've just pressed the little hot swap button. There will be some probably quite decent presets for doing different things. It's worth looking at your, essentially you can think of, you have the ratio control, which basically says once it gets to this volume, how hard am I going to squash it? And if it's turned up pretty far, then it's basically what we call a brick wall. Imagine that the sound is going to come up and hit it, and just that's it. That's the loudest it's going to get. There's also attack and release controls, which are basically to do with when it gets that loud, how fast do I squash it? And these can actually be quite useful for shaping sound. A lot of the time people quite like on things like snare drums. If you have a compressor that has a slightly higher attack, what it'll do is it'll let the initial snap of the snare drum through before squashing it down a bit, and that can make your snare really punch through. Compression's quite an involved topic, and I'm not going to get too into it because we're marching towards 1 o'clock. If people didn't already know, if we imagine that you have created your opus from start to finish, we haven't really covered rendering stuff out. It's quite simple. You probably want to make sure that your master is not going into the red. Also, my Ableton thing is actually turned, my mix is turned down so that you can hear me over the thing, but generally I would just try and have that sitting at 0 and try and mix your track volume so that you're not hitting the red. I'll show you what the red looks like for a moment. In fact, we might even hit it. There you go, that was the red. Red is generally bad. Also, it's worth noting that when you're starting to use EQ, you may be very tempted to crank up the bass on everything. If you're at home listening on small speakers or through headphones or on your laptop speakers, it might not sound that bassy. But you know, don't just crank up the bass. It doesn't always work. You know. I feel like it's the number one thing that people do when they're first starting out, is just crank up that bass, and it's quite often there's enough bass already. Don't worry. You know, if you hear it through a PA system with some subs, suddenly you'll be like, okay, maybe I went a bit too far. But yeah, if you want to render out your arrangement, that's basically my last thing I'm going to say today, which has been mildly rambling, but hopefully I've at least giving you some inspiration. Yeah, if you want to render out your track, it's really easy. You just going to make sure that I don't have anything soloed or muted. You know, this is what will come out. We're going to set. You can either just click and drag to select an amount of time. I always tend to just put the loop thing around it, and then if you click on the if you put this to the amount of time, I tend to put a little bit of extra space at the end, because quite often I'm using things like this synth, even though this clip ends here. This synth is actually doing nothing. I'm sure there's a reason for it. It's because it's all turned off. There we go. Yeah, this has quite a lot of effects on it, so even though it ends here, Actually, that's got an insane amount of anyway, this has effects that also it's got tons of release. Anyway, yeah, I tend to just leave a little bit of a gap at the end after everything's done, because quite often there might be reverbs or delays or stuff that tails off a little bit. But yeah, we're just gonna make sure that's all selected. Go to File, Export Audio. There's various options in here. Which that one should not be on. Render track master is what you want. Generally, if you're just exporting your whole song for you to listen to elsewhere. You'll have a render start and a render length, which should already be set if you selected your time, so you can hopefully ignore that. There's various parameters here. Generally, I would have these off. If you want, you could select normalize, which will just, if the maximum volume is sort of under the theoretical maximum volume, it'll just bunk everything up a little bit. So you can put normalize on or off if you want. I would ignore stuff like create analysis file. You can set the sample rate. I mean, I would just generally export at 44.1 kilohertz. I'm not going to get too into that stuff either. And here you can choose your format. I mean, generally it would be you can just do wave or AF or whatever. You can play with all these settings if you want. You can also export an MP3 version. It also actually has an option to upload your song directly to SoundCloud, which I've never ever used, but that I think you can. I think if you click that, it then asks you for your SoundCloud login, and it can actually just put stuff straight up to SoundCloud. But if we imagine that I'm just doing it that way, and if you click export, it'll then ask you to, you can find a folder on your computer, and I'll just put mine in Mixdowns. You can give it a name, you can press save, and you'll get a little progress bar, and it should, depending on how complex your track is and how long it is and how many effects you put in and how much thinking it needs to do, it'll take a little time to render, and then hopefully you will have a nice rendered version of your track that you can send to your granny or upload to SoundCloud or send to some labels or send to your bandmates or anything like that. There are various other options in rendering, but that's the basics of exporting your finished song. There are also options for instance, you can get it to render every single individual track as an audio file, which would be useful if you were sending. You can do all individual tracks, selected tracks only. There's various things, or just individual tracks. Some things that are useful if you were going to send them off to somebody else to mix, or or if you're kind of working collaboratively with someone. Speaking of working collaboratively with someone, just one last thing I'll mention. It's a really little one. Obviously, you can save and you can save as. There is one other option which is called collect all and save. So when you save your Ableton session, generally what it'll do is it'll make a little folder, and any audio files that you've recorded into that session, it'll bung them in the folder as well. But it won't. For instance, these little samples from the sample pack I gave you last week. By default, it will not save them into the project folder. It'll leave them exactly where they are, which is pretty good, which is generally is actually quite good behavior for me. That works for me, because say you're using the same snare sample in 100 different songs, you don't need it to copy that snare sample 100 times and take up all that space on your hard drive. So it's fine as long as you haven't moved the folder where where that sample was, that's not a problem. If you were to want to send that project to your pal to work on, then that, and you had some samples from a different folder in your computer, they'd be missing. So that's where this one option called collect all and save is necessary. So you've got a few options. Files from elsewhere, that would be the one that would just take, for instance, that would just take a copy of those little workshop files that I gave you last week that I've used in this project. It would just copy them into the folder. Files from other projects as well. There are ways of dragging in files from other projects. So once again, that would just drag them in. Files from user library and library packs as well. It can, if you're using some samples that are in your own library or in some of the factory samples that somebody else might not have, you don't have to select all these options. But yeah, that'll just kind of copy everything in, and it's very useful if you're trying to collaborate with someone. I'm going to stop rambling now, I think. I think I've vaguely, this has been my sort of, these workshops have been my first experience of really start teaching this in a workshop scenario. I've taught friends to use software before, but this has been the first time I've really done it in this way, and this lockdown way has been the first time I've done any of this via a live stream or anything like that. So I hope that it's been useful to people. I think I've enjoyed it. Perhaps we could, if people have made stuff and they want to share it, even if it's just a little sketch, it's always really interesting to hear what different people do with stuff. Let's have a chat. I mean, actually, you can get things like you can upload stuff to SoundCloud. You can get a SoundCloud account or even YouTube. You can, and if you want to set your thing to be maybe not a private bit. What do they call them? The unlisted, link. Just if you want to post them into the event page or something. If people have got stuff, that would be really it'd be really great to hear some stuff if people have been working on it. I'm quite happy to kind of monitor the event page a little bit as well. If people have any questions, still feel free to let me know. I know I'm a little bit rambly, but I feel like I get there in the end. But yeah, I'm really would love to hear what people get up to. There is a ton of content out there on YouTube. There are loads of tutorials, especially if you're, if there's certain aspects of Ableton. Probably don't need me. Loads of people make really good tutorial videos. A lot of which should be useful. There's probably lots I forgot to tell you, but but that's okay. It's an enormous piece of software. 6 hours worth of learning is maybe. I feel like I've thrown quite a lot at you, but I'm glad that today I got through the way that MIDI control and automation works, because I think for me that is what's so powerful about Ableton. It's what allows you to kind of bridge that gap between sitting, clicking on a mouse and doing all that, and suddenly being able to really get your hands on something and suddenly be shaping your sounds. That for me, that's always, when version 1 of Ableton came out, that was what was amazing, and it's still what's amazing. So yeah, I think I will sign off. But yeah, if the Facebook event still exists, and hopefully in some way it might, I don't know if it disappears into the ether, we'll work it out. We'll between me and Joe at the Glad, we'll see if we can work out a way of anybody sharing their stuff if they want to. I think I will sign off. It feels, my stomach is saying that it's probably lunchtime, so I might go and investigate that. Happy Abletoning. I hope you go and make something fantastic. Yeah, signing off. Thank you very much.